Reacting to round one of the NFL draft. That's what we're doing today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work at RotoViz, including just this week before round one, a really fun breakdown. 2026 NFL cheat sheet, advanced stat profiles, and tiered rankings of the top 40 prospects. That's the name. You went through the top 40 and ranked them like in a sort of a rookie draft sense. And then you always take this and sort of edit it after we get the landing spots. You talk through your whole process in there, but great stuff on all the most important prospects. I mean, the top 40, you're getting, I mean, especially in this class, you're getting a lot of names that you don't you probably don't even have to care about. You get to about like 15 and you get to the names that don't really matter anymore. Unfortunately, with this class, that's not true, but I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it is.
But I think this class is a little bit fun in that, like the round that is so bad is the one that we usually really like and try and stockpile picks in. Right? If you're talking about a rookie draft, like round 2 is terrible. I mean, terrible. I think that the back of round 3 and the beginning of round 4 might be kind of fun and might be sort of similar to, because one of the things here, and obviously we know that the vast majority of these players don't matter, but I mean, this is a freakishly athletic wide receiver class. And so the thing that's kind of fun about it is that, like in any draft, you have like the 2 or 3 guys who can play football, and then you've got the players that people are still interested in because they're like, these guys are great athletes. And you're like, yeah, but like, it's not a track and field contest. They'll say, yeah, but, right? Because what if they learn to play a little bit? I mean, once you run out of people who can actually play, which you do very early, it is kind of exciting to see how athletic these guys are. I mean, they're very, very athletic.
So I was writing about the class a little bit over at the newsletter before the draft as well. And one of the like macro takes, because initially when everyone's like, oh, this is a really bad class, I was like, well, there may still be some diamonds in the rough. And then I was thinking about that too. And I'm like, well, I mean, a lot of guys get pushed up. Like when I was looking through your piece, some of the guys you have like just outside the first round of rookie drafts, like at 13 and 14 and stuff, I'm like, these guys would normally go at like the 2-3 turn. Like that's what their profiles are. You usually get a little bit of a better
like underwhelming running backs.
Yeah. And Trey Lance's brother you had in there, Bryce Lance, and he's a super athletic but unproductive small school guy. Like you can get that was like the Chase Claypool thing or whatever, and you're taking him in like the early 3rd round. Claypool wasn't a small school guy, but sort of the same concept where you're usually telling us these like early 3rd round wide receivers, you want them to have some type of defining trait, whether that's really great production or really great athleticism. It can kind of go both ways. But I always thought of that as like 3rd round guys, not, you have him ranked 14th. And it's like, this is an underwhelming 14th ranked player. But anyway, all that stuff.
But once we get the second and 3rd rounds, some of those guys will at least be a little bit interesting because we'll find out that the NFL maybe likes them as much as the Seattle Seahawks like Jadarian Price.
Right. The thing the macro thing I was going to say about the class as a whole, as it relates to all that stuff, is if you like, I was saying, well, probably there's not. It's a little harder to find diamonds in the rough if even some of these guys get pushed up. But maybe there's some depth that's interesting. Maybe there really is some depth into the late round 3 and those things, like you said. And some of the diamonds in the rough would be diamonds in the rough in any class. It doesn't matter how good. Like Puka Nacua wouldn't have been pushed way up in this class. His profile was underrated for reasons that would have remained underrated. He was a day 3 pick and all of that stuff. But the big macro thing I was thinking, if you really want to try to get contrarian, because you talked about the athleticism in the class, and I do think that's interesting because maybe some of the production issues are tied back into the way the sport's evolving. We're seeing at the NFL level. We've talked about the last half decade, and receivers are producing less, right? Like in the modern NFL for a variety of reasons. If that has trickled down to the collegiate level, this would be a hypothesis, to the collegiate level, the highest collegiate level, as the NIL era has concentrated a lot of talent into the the major conferences, really the SEC and Big Ten. And if you talk about one of the things that I think is interesting is you look at the college football playoff last year, like Miami had much better defensive metrics than offensive metrics, and they made a run to the championship. And some of the lack of true dominant teams and what felt like more parity, which is what we got in the NFL playoffs as well, where when we went into the playoffs, we were like, who are even the good teams? that's what it feels like when the defenses are winning a little bit, and the sport it becomes a little bit less clear in terms of like whatever the parity element is. Maybe it's not quite parity is the right word, but the way that the games play out, they can play some really low scoring games, which we saw in the NFL. And we saw Miami won one of their I was looking back at their results. One of their first round game against whoever, Texas A&M or something, was like 10-3 or something. It was like a very, very low scoring defensive battle. The point is there's, a different style of football that gets played than maybe in 2019 or in 2020 in college football when like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson were coming out and Joe Burrow's throwing 60 touchdowns or whatever it was. Maybe that's a little bit different. And so maybe you can make a case that some of these production profiles are a little bit different for some of these guys, and we should maybe grade on a little of a curve. And if you at least humor that concept, then these athletic profiles and things you're talking about do get kind of interesting. But that's another conversation. It's a little bit of a broader conversation. We're here today more to talk about the landing spots in round one and some of the profiles that are there. I don't know that I even believe that case that I just made, for the record. A couple things I want to talk about before we go. Number one, Sean, I've already gotten a bunch of questions. Typically, you and I have done a day 2 live stream. We've done that for several years now. Audio listeners probably hoping that was going to hit their feed tomorrow. It is not something we're going to do this year for a couple of reasons. One is just scheduling and time and things. Unfortunately, another is, again, this class. When we were talking about whether or not to bend a lot of things and make it work, we were like, well, we could sit there for the whole time and there may not be a whole lot of picks. I mean, it looks like now we'll probably get Eli Stowers and I think some tight ends, and there'll probably be a few wide receivers because there typically are on day 2, but not a lot of super interesting ones. And then there may only be like 1 or 2 running backs in the whole day 2. Like, we're probably not getting a ton of running backs. This class isn't expected to be pushed up into day 2. And so, and then we also got Ty Simpson in day 1. So there's probably not even going to be, we'll see what happens. People listening to this will have potentially already seen day 2. We're recording this Friday morning. It's going to be hopefully on your feeds before day 2 even happens. But this is going to be a round 1 reaction show. I did want to acknowledge, a bit of an apology that we won't have the live day 2 stuff, mostly because of sort of scheduling and things like that. We'll obviously do some more content around the rest of the draft, day 2, day 3, and all of that. But we wanted to hop on today, and this kind of a last-minute decision to do it. We didn't really know what we were going to do, but we just talked a half an hour ago, so let's jump on. And we haven't really talked a lot prior to hitting record today. So we're going to kind of go through our responses to day 1 with each other live for the listeners here. But we wanted to jump on because day 1 was wild. Like we talked last week about some of the potential landing spots or things we were looking for at the top. We talked about some of those teams. Washington was one we talked about as a potential landing spot for some of the skill players. They end up going defense. Right away, it starts at number 3 with Jeremiah Love going to Arizona. And then right behind that, the Titans were mocked to Love, or Love was mocked to the Titans a lot. The Titans end up going Carnell Tate at 4. Not a ton of buzz necessarily for him, though he was expected to go pretty high, potentially, not much farther behind 4. Like certainly was talked about as a potential top 10 pick. We get Jordan Tyson to the Saints later in the top 10. We get Mai Lemon falling a little bit. The Eagles and Howie Roseman kind of doing what he always does, which is he sees a guy falling probably behind where he should be falling and where some of the consensus big board stuff was, and he sees value there and he makes a small little trade up to go get a guy that further solidifies that A.J. Brown is going to be traded away from Philly after June 1st when the contract allows for it, as we've been telling you basically all offseason was very likely to happen. And so you have Mai Lemon now probably with Devonta Smith. And Dallas Goedert is back, and that's what that passing game is going to look like going forward. You get the Jets landing Kenyon Sadiq and then getting back into the first round for their 3rd first-round pick to get Omar Cooper, so 2 skill position players to New York. You get the Rams at 13 taking Ty Simpson, which was an aggressive pick. A lot of things that like the Jets were Omar Cooper was mocked to the Jets a lot in that pick in the middle of the round where they ended up taking Sadiq. So like that's one that there was some expectation that he may land there. Certainly the Eagles taking a receiver was not super surprising, and Lemon kind of being that guy, sliding a little, but then the Eagles trading up to get him, not super surprising necessarily. The actual capital of Love and Tate and Tyson all going in the top 10, not super surprising. But I will say that like some of the landing spots were a little bit surprising. Some of the player fits with the teams. So I'm excited to jump in and break that all down with you. I gotta ask. I'm sure the listeners will be curious too, because we talk about the Chiefs a lot. Before we jump into the skill position guys, because there's a lot to talk about there. I do want to get your take on the Chiefs trading up from 9 to 6, because they gave up kind of a lot. It seemed like a little bit of an aggressive trade up for a cornerback that a lot of people had available at 9, that he would make it to them. And Sonny Styles and Caleb Downs had both slid, and there was a lot of expectation that those guys could have been going in the top 10. Downs ends up going 11. Styles went at 7. There was some talk after the draft, or even maybe during the draft, that Ben Albright tweeted that Washington head faked the Chiefs, quote, head faked them, talking about the cornerback, that the Washington was going to take him at 7. And so the Chiefs maybe had to trade up. No, confirmation on that. Washington was said to really like Sonny Styles, who they end up getting at 7. But maybe if Styles went 6, that Washington would have been interested in the corner that Chiefs came up for. It was certainly a position of need. But it's interesting to me that even if he went, Casey could have stayed put and maybe taken Caleb Downs, who's this safety that people are really, really excited about. You can still get a player. The Chiefs have done this a lot. And so I'm curious, like they traded up to get Rashee Rice, and then Marvin Mims fell to their pick, and Rice seemed to be right. But they like to do this. They don't like tier-based draft. They like to do this thing where they pick their player. The example where it didn't work was when they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire over Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift in that great running back class. Maybe they could have moved back. There was like 6 good running backs in that class, and they were like, this is the one we have to have. And they went and did it. You're very thrilled about me bringing that one back up. But they do seem to have this, like, we got to go get our guy when we know that he's our guy. And sometimes they're very right on that. Sometimes they've had some issues with that. I had an issue with them trading up for a player that probably could have made it to them. And then if he did go, there would have been alternatives that also help your secondary and could just be better players overall. Maybe they don't fit the positional need as much because they do need like a cornerback. They lost both their corners. I was curious your thoughts on the Chiefs' decision.
Well, I was going to put it to you with this framing, which is that, and I think that, I mean, any of these things are fun and any of them could work out, right? And one of the things I always try and remind myself, I was vaguely frustrated with the Chiefs when they did basically the same thing a few years ago, right? Where they get McDuffie and they get Karlaftis, they pass on Breece Hall, the defense does improve, those guys both hit. I mean, Breece Hall also hits and would have really helped their offense in the interim. But it's possible for these moves to work. And I think that occasionally you can run into problems when you don't do the obvious thing. You were talking about some of the trade-ups. I was immediately thinking about the fact when they had George Pickens staring them right in the face, and like, well, what if we move down and take Sky Moore? And you're like, what if you don't do that? I mean, you don't get a lot out of it. And that's a horrible, horrible mistake, right? But when we have this situation here in these first 15 picks and then contrasted with the Eagles, like, what is the worst selection here when we're talking about the Arizona Cardinals are awful? I mean, they are awful across the board. And the one position they have kind of covered, well, I mean, their passing game has some interesting weapons if Marvin Harrison ever develops, which at this point, that's, I mean, a very big if. But you've got a lot at the running back position. It's the number 3 pick. You take Jeremiah Love. I'm very pro get a star running back. But again, within the context of what makes sense overall, if he's sitting there for a good team at 15, I'm all in on that. When you're the Arizona Cardinals, and again, when we just did the show last week, we talked about the Cardinals look like they're playing defense with 9 or 10 guys most of the time last year. So they take a running back. That's obviously a fun one.
Well,
you have the Chiefs.
I want to add a little note on that. Adam Levitan, our buddy at ETR, threw out a note about, because people are comparing it to Jahmyr Gibbs a few years ago at 12, and people didn't like that, and it worked out great. And so you just said the pick 15 thing, and people say, well, what's the major difference between 3rd and 15th? In his social media post, he referenced that in 2026 money, the total value of the contract difference between just 12th overall and third. 26 million versus 53 million. So that's one of the huge, it's double. So that's one of the huge things that happened here with this pick is Jeremiah Love immediately became the highest paid running back in the NFL. He has gotten more guaranteed money than any running back before, but also being guaranteed 53 million at a position that, yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of contracts that reach that. It's not just a draft capital thing. If you take him in the teens and you're giving him 26 million, that's still a massive amount that really hurts the whole argument about surplus value and hurts your ability to really have a smash relative to what you can do like in free agency or other things at that particular position. And positional value is steeped in that reality that there's alternatives. And in free agency, you can acquire good players at this position. You can't at other positions. Like, it's really hard to get a good wide receiver. To retain Alec Pierce, the Colts had to pay him a massive amount of money, and he's just not as good as the other receivers that make that amount of money. Let's put it that way. It's a much harder position to replace, to just pay people. That's one of the big issues with Love here, in addition to the fact that this team has a lot of other issues, as you were pointing at, and maybe already has running back covered. But I just wanted to say that, like, the difference between that really stuck out to me, that when Levitan tweeted that today, that difference, you said, maybe you could take him at 15. The difference in guaranteed money there is so massive. The decision to pay him number 3 overall money is also a really big part of this. So anyway, continue on.
So then you have the Chiefs. And in addition to how you broke it down, where they had other defensive options, right, and had been linked to other defensive options, you mentioned Styles and Downs. Obviously, Downs goes 11. Also, Jordan Tyson is still available. You don't know if he'll make it to 9. He gets picked 8. But when we think about what the Chiefs did with McDuffie and have done with some other players, including Tyreek Hill, you think about the off-field stuff with Rashee Rice. I don't know that the Chiefs can necessarily get out of Rashee Rice in a way that makes a lot of sense for them. But if they could, they should, right? And Jordan Tyson would be a massive upgrade. He's potentially there in the mix. The whole point here is that somebody is going to get to you at 9. And then the other person, and the one that was noted on the NFL Network telecast when the trade happened, was that the Chiefs were heavily linked to Ruben Bain, who Ben went 15th, right? They're like, they may be trading up to 6 to get this guy. And they're like, no, that's not what it was. But also that guy ends up going 15th. Obviously, the Chiefs would have made a good pick or would have had a lot of options at 9. It doesn't mean that this won't work, right? But it's just the idea that you had to trade up. Yeah, you've got to be very, very clear. And then the Rams at 13, taking Ty Simpson, who's like a half-year wonder before he gets hurt last season, kind of mid-season, and the numbers fall off. I mean, this is like a very poor man's Michael Penix type of profile. The Rams in this position where, I mean, they're maybe the best team in football. They're like a player away. They may be in a spot where they're never going to draft in the top 15. If Sean McVay stays and they continue to run things well, you're not going to have a top 15 pick again for a decade. And you're going to take like a day 3 QB. So, and again, now, I want to say
hate Michael Penix. You're somewhat nice because I'm a Washington Huskies guy, and so maybe the listeners don't realize. You say it to me a little bit more off the air, I think. You don't think Michael Penix is very good. So when you say a very poor man's Michael Penix pick, I just want the listeners to understand what it is that you're saying with that. It's a rough profile.
And we know that the QBs are difficult to project, and occasionally they do come out of nowhere and play pretty well. And so the idea that teams could have their guy, I mean, we know that happens. We kind of know it was going to happen with Simpson, which was one of the reasons why, despite having really nothing going for him, I mean, he's not that big, he's not that athletic, he doesn't have good numbers, but evidently passes the eye test for a large number of people. And so he's projected sort of at the end of round 2. But again, I mean, end of round 1, right, in the 20s. But you think about like how much value the Rams are giving away, even just by staying put and not risking some type of a trade down here. I mean, just
so you're
absolutely
filibustering with a lot of terrible other picks to quantify that the Chiefs didn't do as bad as the other team. Is that right?
No, I want to know which one you think is the worst of these 3. And then if you want to, contrast it with the Philadelphia Eagles, who are like, among all the good teams in football, we have the worst coaching staff and we haven't fixed it. It almost doesn't matter because our organization is so well run by comparison that like we're fielding an all-star team. We don't have to have good coaches. Ben, the Eagles, they have to pay a little bit to trade up as well, but they traded up for the best wide receiver in the draft who fell to them at 20. I mean, that's a massive, massive contrast.
So I did get the answer out of you that I was looking for. Hopefully the listeners heard it as well. You have the Chiefs move up 3 spots as one of the worst moves of the entire first round. I would rank it 3rd worst out of those. I think the Love and Simpson decisions were meaningfully worse. I don't think the Chiefs' decision was that bad, but I was curious if you had some like Homer optimism there. You're right there with me that they should have stayed put.
I mean, maybe he'll be very, very good. That would be the Homer optimism. Maybe he'll be very, very good.
Yeah, that's what you always have to tell yourself on a trade up, right? Like maybe the player will be worth it. Somebody would have fallen to them was sort of the way you put that, and I completely agree with. But yeah, let's talk about these other landing spots and work through them. Obviously, we knew Mendoza was going to go to the Raiders. I think you like him a little bit more than it seems like nobody's really talked about him, but he's actually a pretty interesting prospect. I mean, it's worth just noting that you're, I think, pretty optimistic about him. But Love 3 to Arizona. We agree Arizona was crazy. Massive, aggressive decision from a resource allocation standpoint. There's not really a strong justification. As you said, they already have, like they gave Tyler Algier pretty strong money. I've been making fun of that ADP all offseason, but they gave him good money. You have James Conner coming back. They agreed to bring him back. He's a veteran presence, and this is a young team, and great. He'll be there to provide some leadership, and maybe he gets injured or whatever. You still have Trey Benson on a rookie contract. I don't think they expect nothing out of him, but he's going into year 3. Maybe he could stay healthy. He still has some skill-based upside. That is enough at running back. You can literally see what you have there, get through this year, and move forward. They clearly just wanted to add something exciting, something that could sell tickets, some of those things. I think it's disastrous from the perspective that the Cardinals need so much, and they're also in a division right now where they are so buried. You have Sean McVay, you have Kyle Shanahan, and now you have Mike McDonald, who when we did our coach draft this offseason, I took 1st overall, even ahead of those guys. You have 3 of the consistently best organizations at maintaining, successful rosters over the last couple of decades or decade or what have you, and you're trying to contend with that. You got to do a lot of things right. You certainly can't just burn a lot of resources at non-premium positions. That's tough. Setting that aside, what does it mean for Jeremiah Love's fantasy value? He's still the 101 in Dynasty and those things, I assume. But is this an Ashton Genty situation where we're going to be disappointed because the team around him is so bad? I'm pretty concerned. I got to be honest. I think it's going to be tough for him to step right in there. And I also think this element that they have all these other running backs, if James Conner does make the team, they don't decide to cut him or anything, he's probably going to play some early in the year. They may not rush Jeremiah Love into a massive role right away, even though they took him 3rd overall, which seems weird. Almost every running back that gets taken aside does get rushed into a huge role. And yet the Cardinals are a weird one. They did this despite having a long-time workhorse veteran back who's a well-respected guy in the organization who's there. It wouldn't surprise me if James Conner's starting week 1 and playing a decent amount for at least the first, 5 weeks or something. But that would be very annoying for Jeremiah Love that a third of his season he's splitting work before he finally takes over mid-season or something. Am I over? And then Tyler Algier is still, a big part of this. He's the guy that had a top 100 ADP for fantasy drafters. And how much is he going to play? He's still going to play some, right? Is Love going to get a committee issue in his first season on a bad offense, so not have a lot of touchdown equity? What should we expect out of Love in Arizona?
Well, in my top 40 preview, I wrote that Love might already be the most valuable player in Dynasty because these running backs who project like this, basically don't miss, right? The guys who have the Love profile, who play their age, play their rookie seasons at age 21, We're talking Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley, Darren McFadden, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor. And you think about that, the only one who's even vaguely a miss is Darren McFadden, who averaged 21 points per game in his third season. We've got some massive rookie seasons in there. We've got some just gigantic, year 2 and 3 or year 3 and 4 in there. Certainly, I still think you're going to get that from him. I think it's such a bummer for Tyler Algier, right, who has to go from Bijan Robinson to this. Now, we know that his peripherals weren't great last year, but he does have a couple years in there where he was quite a good player. And I guess the disappointment or frustration overall would simply be that it wasn't necessary even beyond the running back type of situation. This is going to be a team that will be trailing. This is a team that does have some interesting passing pieces with Harrison. You think about what Michael Wilson did last year with Jacoby Brissett. Obviously, Trey McBride absolutely lights the world on fire. I mean, Trey McBride in the midst of what could end up being the greatest tight end stretch in NFL history. And when you then put Love with it, I think this team can actually be pretty exciting as long as they don't try and go, the LaFleur brother route and just have an offense that is hand the ball off to a Josh Jacobs type. And now, Jeremiah Love is not that, right? You should be more explosive, but you also have to want to move the ball, want to score points, want to incorporate these other guys. On paper, the offensive coordinator here is Nathaniel Hackett, who not only should not be an NFL coordinator, should not be in the NFL. And that's a very harsh statement, but the results for him have been catastrophically bad. And so you look at that and there are some concerns. I do think there's the potential for the Cardinals to actually be super fun now and to be a team that can score with the Rams, be a team that actually can threaten the defense there with the Seahawks, be a team that in some ways is built to try and accomplish the same things with Love that Christian McCaffrey did for the 49ers offense. So, thinking again within the division. Now, Love is not the receiving back that McCaffrey is, but when you're talking about someone who is very flexible, who has a lot of skills, who is a big playback, who can do the receiving part, we're talking about a guy who goes number 3 because he does have this potential to author that Saquon Barkley 2024 type of season where everyone is looking around and be like, how do we stop this offense? This guy's breaking multiple 60-yard touchdown runs a game. Now, obviously, it's not quite to that extent, but that 2024 season for Barkley was crazy, and we're talking about probably the most like Barkley prospect since Barkley came out. Now, the other side of it, and this is apples and oranges because the NFL let Jonathan Taylor fall so far. But Jonathan Taylor is kind of the other back in here who's just such a close comparison for Love. And then in part because he did fall to the second round. But, it took him about 2/3 of a season to really get going, in part because of other teammates. One of the things that was so frustrating thinking about Love going into the draft is that you keep hearing, the thing sort of day of is just reporting the Cardinals are going to take him. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy, but I still have my Arizona Cardinals apparel. It's dumb, but at least it'll be fun. I don't want him with the Titans, with the other backs they have there, and in a terrible offense. I don't want him with the Giants on top of Cam Scatterbo. In many ways, this is the best case scenario for fans.
Okay.
And I think it'll end up being okay for him. But, it's weird, and it's certainly suboptimal for the team, as we've discussed.
You don't have any concerns about my committee stuff, any of that. He's the 3rd overall pick. He's a superstar talent. We always bet on the talent to kind of work out talent-wise.
Well, you mentioned how people are talking about the connection or the comparison to Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs has been in a committee. You think about where Christian McCaffrey was taken. McCaffrey was in a committee. No, I think a committee is going to happen in some way, shape, or form. The question, I think, especially in today's day and age, we saw Bijan Robinson put up huge numbers with Algier actually still vulturing some pretty important carries or pretty important touches last year in Atlanta. It's like, can you create a big enough pie? And just what is the committee? Because there are certain committees that will kill you and certain committees that are still basically fine. I would think if you draft a guy 3rd, you're going to try and craft a committee that's still basically fine. But, you can't guarantee it. And certainly there are things in terms of the coaching staff for the Cardinals where you're going to have to do quite a bit in order to establish trust with the fan base, with fantasy analysts, managers, what have you. I mean, this is not an established group that you can really count on.
That's the way you put that is what I'm thinking as well. Is I do think they'll craft some kind of committee that's favorable to him. But the question, you said what does the committee actually look like, and then the size of the pie are the two questions. I'm sitting here looking at the Cardinals, and I'm concerned about the size of the pie. You just made a decent case that they could be a little bit more fun. But when you bring up the Nathaniel Hackett name, I mean, the idea that he shouldn't even be in the NFL, and then you're like, yeah, it's kind of harsh. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's harsh it's harsh from a human perspective, I guess. It's harsh if you're like, there's really no floor to how bad a guy could be. Like, if you consider any type of alternative, like every other hire you could have made would be someone that you'd expect something more out of. Literally, Nathaniel Hackett, to me, if this offense isn't one of the worst offenses in the league, I'll be impressed. It'll be one of the first times he's ever coordinated an offense that didn't look terrible. Like
in the recent past, and certainly you expect the head coach to be the guy really in charge of everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's the guy who's hired. He's the young name. You sometimes have these guys. I don't think this is necessarily the right way to go, but who want to balance their youth with experience, even if that experience has been unsuccessful recently. And I think there's probably a mentoring type of element, and there's probably a bounce ideas off of type of element. But I mean, bouncing ideas off of someone who is young and they shouldn't have exactly the same ideas you have. But I mean, I'm concerned.
Year one, Christian McCaffrey. I thought that was a really interesting take. Only 197 touches, over 1,000 scrimmage yards, 1,086, 7 touchdowns. A good first year, ultimately. Immediately the next year, he goes from 197 touches to 326, then 403, and basically is a 2,000-yard guy in year 2, and then a 2,400-yard guy in year 3. He did split that initially. Was it Jonathan Stewart still at that time that he was splitting with? Yeah, Jonathan Stewart had led the team in rushes and everything. I don't think so. Jonathan Stewart had 198 carries that year, and you had Cam Newton with 136, and then McCaffrey is third on the team with 117 carries, but he caught 80 balls. I don't think it's going to be exactly like that. My point was actually to say that McCaffrey had a really good season on a bad team. Well, actually, they went 11-5. That's not true. They weren't a bad team. They were picking the top 10 the year prior, and for some reason I was thinking they're bad, but that was the Cam Newton years. They were good. But he came to a team that did already have a back and was used on the almost in some ways on the weak side of the committee. A lot fewer carries than Stewart had, but he caught 80 passes. So really, for any fantasy related factor, he had the way better workload. Regardless, McCaffrey, different player entirely. But I thought that was an interesting discussion point, as well as Gibbs, who we had talked about, who has been splitting with Montgomery for several years, and how he's been able to score. He was still very good his rookie year. Those guys were very productive early on. Love can still be a very productive player, despite having a little bit of a split to his usage and stuff. I there's just a lot of names there. I guess I'm kind of concerned that, like, if Connor's on the team and being used, and Algier's clearly active on game days and being used and got paid, a pretty good amount of money. I mean, what's the cap? Like, how high can Love? Is he only getting like 60% of the work? And like, are we making sure that he's getting all the receiving work? Hopefully, but Connor's always been really good in the pass game and really good in the red zone for all the teams that he's worked with. So anyway, I'm excited for Love. I think you gave some really good ideas about similar kind of career trajectories for both Gibbs and McCaffrey. Part of the point was, yeah, they split a little bit early, but not long after they're kind of taking over their backfields and able to be stars. And that's still what we would expect for Love. The 2026 question will linger for me a little bit.
Carnell Tate, number 4 to the Titans, was the next pick. I was on with the guys at Ship Chasing Live last night and was sharing some concerns about Tate. You and I talked, I think, a little bit after the show about Tate last week. You gave me a little bit more information that got my head spinning a little, and then I was digging into him a lot over the last week, and I got pretty concerned about the profile. I shared some of those thoughts on Ship Chasing, and our buddy Pat Carrain was kind of give me a little bit of pushback, and well, a couple of the guys were, but at one point called it kind of a bad take that I was giving. So then I gave a lot more of a take. It may have just been my big regretful moment that I'll look back on. And Carnell Tate's going to be a really good player, and obviously, I mean, going 4th overall, he's going to get plenty of opportunity. He's tied to a quarterback in Cam Ward that I made a case on that show last night as well that probably got a little bit of a bad rap for his statistics in year 1 because of how bad that situation was, because his head coach got fired after 6 games, because his Calvin Ridley ran like 100 routes and the rest of the receiving core was like day 3 rookies, and Van Jefferson and Tyler Lockett, who they ended up cutting. And I mean, it was just bad. So they bring in Tate. Tate's going to pretty clearly be the number 1 there, and he's going to get plenty of opportunity to be a star. There are some real concerns with this profile that are sort of, I don't want to say like hard for me to overlook, but I think he's going to be a productive player. But I mean, was he worth the number 4 overall pick? Let's start there.
So I guess I would say no. And one of the things that is tricky is just when you have a number 4 pick, I do think that you want to do some combination of get a need, but get a great player and someone who has a really good floor, but also swing for the fences. Right now, you say, well, that's a lot to want. Sometimes there just isn't anything. These teams at the top, right, they have a lot of needs. The Titans are not one player away. And certainly one of the frustrations or one of the difficulties with some of these teams is they have kind of set up their off seasons where they were really forcing themselves into a certain type of pick, a certain position almost, in those top 10 picks. And I think that's unfortunate because when you have a top 5 pick, you need to get someone who is going to absolutely crush, has that ceiling. And Tate is more the type of player where you're like, this pick will probably work. I don't think you can do that at number 4, which again doesn't mean that he won't work. But you think about his stats in general, you contrast them even with the Ohio State guys, because one of the things that we know is that Ohio State has this football factory. Carnell Tate is not remotely comparable to Marvin Harrison or Chris Olave as a vertical receiver. He's not comparable to Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, or Emeka Egbuka with the ball in his hands. He's not comparable to Jeremiah Smith in either facet, and he doesn't have the extended track record to compare with any of them either. Now, the one person who would be a little bit closer there would be JSN because it was 1 year for him, but it was this epic, just monstrous, massive year where he dwarfs guys like Garrett Wilson and Emeka Egbuka. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, both of whom are almost certainly better as prospects than Carnell Tate.
He also did it over far more games because he had that massive bowl game. And Tate only played 11 games last year. Like he missed some time, even though they had some postseason games. He only played like 11 games. So I mean, I was getting a little flack last night for citing the raw stats, and obviously we do want to control for stuff. But he only had 51 catches for 875 yards across these 11 games. 9 touchdowns. It's not that the raw stats are the only thing, but I am trying to emphasize that if you even make a comparison to somebody like JSN's one big year, he had 95 catches, 1,600 yards. It's a much over 13 games. It's a larger sample, both of games played, but also of just overall production. He did a lot more than Tate ever did.
Well, and you think about Smith stepping on Tate right from the beginning. Whereas Marvin Harrison, another top 5 player and a much more deserving top 5 player, even though he has busted so far as an NFL player, in addition to Wilson and Olave, JSN was stepping on him. Right. So again, when we're thinking about this contrast of different players on the team, you talk about the raw stats and how much do they matter and this, that, and the other thing. Man, Carnell Tate just gets a 76 in the wide receiver prospect lab, even when you consider draft slot, which is hugely important. And he was taken number 4 overall. This idea that you can somehow be a great prospect without hardly any production. And that's a weird perspective because we know that's not the way that it works either, right? You simply do not have guys who are worthy of picks in the first round, much less in the top 5, who get to this point and you wave it away and be like, they barely played, but they were good on these handful of plays that they did participate in. That's just simply not the way that it works. Now, he was good on those. In the SIS numbers, he has a 3.4, I believe, yards per route, which is quite good. But, I mean, it's based on being able to exploit defenses vertically. And I talked about him not being as good vertically as a couple of his teammates. In part, again, that's sort of a volume type of thing. One of the things that jumps out with Tate that's kind of interesting, and the way that I ran across this particular thing was actually researching Brennan Thompson, who's like a Xavier Worthy type of pick or a Hollywood Brown type of pick, is that almost half of Tate's production this past year came on passes that traveled over 25 yards in the air. Now, being able to beat people vertically is valuable. But when you're thinking about a guy who goes in the top 5, one of the things that I kept preaching on Marvin Harrison is that you want to see guys who are going to exploit a lot of different levels, who are going to have flexibility, who are going to be good with the ball in their hands. One of the things that we see with Tate is the target per route numbers are very low. Now, partly you can just say, well, Jeremiah Smith is there, and that's true. But again, we're talking about someone who's going to be picked in the top 5. Swinging for the fences is not drafting someone who was, we talk a lot about him not being the best player on his own team, but it's worth acknowledging that it's not like it was close, right? We're talking about a gap the size of the Grand Canyon, and you're picking this guy number 4 overall. So we see very specific things with Tate that allow him to be efficient in 2025 on what you pointed out is not a particularly large sample. And I think the scouts like him. The Ohio State community likes him. I think especially within the context of this draft and some of the other things that happened, you can't be super fired up about Omar Cooper. You can't be super fired up about Lemon. We talked about that being a good reality pick. It's certainly not good for him in fantasy. The situation for Tate is that he's going to be almost certainly a top 3 pick in your rookie draft, and that makes sense. I wouldn't be trying to push people off of taking him in the top 3. But I don't think that we can look at the draft pick and look at the yards per route number and wave away everything else, because everything else is a lot of red flags.
One of the things that works in his favor is the young age. Blair had a great piece over at RotoViz where he talked about, well, he's just looking at the Phenom Index for the different receivers, but he talked about Tate a little bit because Tate had the best Phenom Index in this class, but he contextualizes it really well by saying that even though it was the best in this class, it falls way behind some of the top scores from recent classes. And he shows all the scores from 2020 to 2026. And Tate comes in 26th. So there's 25 in basically those 6 other classes, 2020 through 2025, that are ahead of him, which is roughly 4 per class, right? So in most classes, Carnell Tate's positive note, the strong age-adjusted production, the specifics of it would have fallen quite a ways down that list. But instead he is the best of this class in that particular thing. The thing that I always love to look at it from the per route run stuff, the yards per route run, and then I like to break it into the component parts: targets per route run, yards per target. My big issue with Carnell Tate is the first 2 years he doesn't have good yards per route run, and everyone's saying, well, he had all these great teammates. He had Marvin Harrison. His second season, he runs 384 routes, which ends up being a career high for him. It's kind of a lot of routes. And he only has a 1.91 yards per route run, which is good when I talk about like NFL numbers, but it's not good for a top 5 NFL prospect. But he had both Harrison and Emeka Egbuka there, and Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka there. Jeremiah Smith was in his freshman year, and then Egbuka was still there. So, okay, fine. We can make that excuse. Or I'm calling it an excuse because it keeps getting brought up as if Tate definitely would have done a lot more if he wasn't playing with the players he was playing with. And we can't just give credit for things that didn't happen. One of the things that I want to emphasize is I went back and looked. The reason we're talking about these teammate scores and all of these types of things and a lot of the models these days is because we have had a lot of examples of really good teammates playing at the collegiate level. But if you go back and you look at Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, they both smashed. You go look at even all the way back to Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. They both had about 1,100 yards on a team that only threw for like 3,200, and no one else had more than 200 yards. They had like 200 plus of the 3,200 receiving yards. So they really smashed when you control for team volume and those things. Both of them, they really split it. You look at Brian Thomas. He was similar to Tate, and then he wasn't very good the first 2 years in some of the per route stuff, and then he really broke out the final year due to efficiency. He had 17 touchdowns that final season. His efficiency was astronomical working off of Malik Neighbors. And so that this cuts two ways. The thing with Tate that gets
Tate touchdowns in 37 career games, just to contrast that with Brian Thomas.
Yeah, you cut out a little bit there, but it was 14 career touchdowns, right?
Yes.
Across all 3 seasons. And the way that this teammate thing works, at least for me, what I'm seeing is a lot of takes that just immediately assume that it's a positive for Tate's profile to say he played alongside Jeremiah Smith, and therefore, he would have done better if he didn't have this great player playing alongside of him. I think it's interesting that in year 2, when he had 2 other really good players, he was the clear number 3. In year 3, in his breakout year, Ibuka's gone, and he's the clear number 2. And that's a different setup from a football perspective. When you are the clear number 2, there are situations where having an elite number 1 on the other side of the field, we talk about this some of the NFL level, is drawing coverage away and is helpful to you. Defenses are scheming for Jeremiah Smith, who is like a Julio Jones type player and prospect, and everyone agrees. And that's why everyone is saying this as a positive about Tate. Well, he had Jeremiah Smith. We got to be fair. That's how the defenses are playing it as well. They are not scheming for Carnell Tate, who's much smaller and is slower. He's not as much of a threat or as dangerous on the field. And so you do benefit off of that. And what I would say about the Brian Thomas comp, the one that actually looks similar, and then Brian Thomas went on to have a really good rookie year, but then did have a questionable second season, is for Brian Thomas, working off of a Malik Neighbors type, he took more advantage of that with the 17 TDs. That's the point that I'm trying to drive home there. For the other, so I went through all the LSU tandems. For the other,
I just wanted to point out too, while you're kind of talking about that, Justin Jefferson, in the year where Jamar Chase has almost 1,800 yards, Justin Jefferson has over 1,200 air yards. He has over 700 yards after the catch. He has 27 evaded tackles. He has a monstrous season while playing with Jamar Chase.
And that's the part of all this that you really got my antennas perking up after the show last week, because you were telling me like how Tate is so bad with the ball in his hand. Like his yak numbers are really bad. His missed tackles force and evasion numbers are not good. It's not just that he was a high ADOT guy that led to the bad yak. So the way that I break down the yards per out run is the yards per target and targets per out run. And then when I think about the yards per target element of it, there's a big element of like, okay, what did you do before the catch and what did you do after the catch point? Is it air yards? Is it yak, right? Those are the 2 things that go into receiving yardage. And for Tate, it's very clearly leans heavily toward the air yard element. You said almost half of his yards came on throws that went 25 plus yards downfield. That stuff is not very sticky. Deep efficiency is very like situation and scheme dependent often. And we see a lot of guys that do spike. This is one of my concerns with Alec Pierce. You go look at his first 2 years, didn't hit on a lot of those plays. Go look at the last 2 years. He didn't earn a ton of volume, but he did hit on a lot of those plays, and he looked great. And I do think he's a very good receiver. He can track the ball. He can fight through contact and all that stuff. And I think Tate has those skills too. But if you bank on just that, that's what Matthew Golden's profile was last year. And I've had people disagree with that and say, well, Matthew Golden's profile was quite a bit worse, and it was. But if you bank on that, my argument would be, because I think Golden, he's a guy I was really out on. Sean, you were not.
Did Smith have someone? I mean, did Golden have someone like Smith who is getting all of the defensive attention when he's trying to run his routes down the field?
Yeah, so that's the part. Yeah, there's several things here, but a lot of people are saying you have to see Jeremiah Smith as a positive to Tate's profile. And I do think when you look at Tate's specific profile, that so when you break up his yards per out run, which go up over 3 in his final season, the targets per out don't really spike. That's the stickier side of it. That's the side that this guy earns a lot of volume. It's a high ADOT profile, and he's seeing a decent number of targets per out. But if you go look at the other tandems of receivers, I was talking about the LSU ones, and even if you go look at the OSU ones, where the guys, multiple players from the same college offense went on to be good at the NFL level, you don't see guys get as trampled on by their teammates. They were still good. They were still productive. And that's what you said as well. Tate has to have some type of production. This 22.8% targets per route that Tate had last year, which is his best year, where his yards per route run does get up to 3.02, and it is very strong. That 22.8% is Brian Thomas is comparable. Matthew Golden stuff is comparable. These deep threats that were thriving on efficiency, but not the really good players, the other ones that I mentioned. Or if you go to Ohio State, like Marvin Harrison is a similar deep threat profile that has not really hit at the NFL level. He's a great example of how if you don't have the right quarterback connection and everything, you can have a really sterling production profile in college and not actually see that hit very well at the NFL level because you're relying on stuff that's so vertical. There's more to it than just the receiver talent. You have to have the scheme and you have to have the quarterback and those things. And there's a lot of volatility with some of that type of production. But anyway, Marvin Harrison's per route profile was incredible. You go back further, the JSN stuff, obviously we talked about. Garrett Wilson's was really strong. Chris Olave is the one where it wasn't super strong. He never had a raw 1,000-yard season in college. And he's the older guy who gets stepped on a little bit by younger players. When JSN comes up, he's younger than him and JSN outproduces him. That was some of the concern we shared about Olave when Olave was coming out. But if you go back to Chris Olave's profile, Chris Olave's final 3 years, his targets per route are 29.9, 27.1, 24.8. That final year is when JSN comes in and it falls down a little bit. And that was some of the concern. His yards per route run, he has multiple years over 3.3, and then it falls to like 2.3 in the final year. But Olave, that's like 3 years of per route production that is much stronger than even Tate's final season.
And again, competing with good players.
Competing with two good players. He's the third guy. This element where Tate was the second guy clearly and is working off one dude to draw the coverage. There should be, I think, a lot more of a red flag element with Tate's profile that this particular type of production, per route production, and I'm not saying I'm definitely going to be right, but I do think we need to peel back the layers of this stuff more. He had the 3 yards per route run last year. It was with a low targets per route, and then it was with a 13.3 yards per target. So you're really thriving on efficiency. The other important thing about Tate's profile last year is he got hurt a little bit. He only ran 290 routes. I'd like to see a bigger sample because I don't think if he ran 400 plus routes that this 3+ yards per route run was stuck because it was so dependent on yards per target. And to your point, that yards per target was very dependent on pre-catch point air yards production, not ball in hand. He's not creating. If he had some stuff in the creation metrics, like you said, Justin Jefferson did, then we'd be like, okay, this guy's talented. He's doing things independent of Jeremiah Smith. He's not doing any of that stuff in his profile. He's just thriving on the fact that guys aren't guarding him. He's winning on one-on-ones down the field. That like defenses don't care about this other guy. Is he good? Yes, he's obviously good. He's a former 5-star high school recruit who went to Ohio State, got on the field, played ahead of a lot of dudes. I'm not saying he's bad. The NFL took him in the top 5 overall. Like, I'm not saying this is a bad player, but I got a lot of pushback to saying that, like, I think there's a lot of the rookie ADPs in best ball and in redraft have been really pushed up. And there's a lot of pushback from some of the like older school people that are like, man, you guys take rookies way too high. And I'm looking for opportunities where I think, yeah, sometimes the rookies are getting pushed up too high and we need to be a little cautious. Carnell Tate's been going in the 6th round of early best ball drafts, at the end of the 6th round. And I got some feedback last night that that's actually a lot lower than recent top 10 picks, that guys like Neighbors and Harrison in their rookie year were going in like the 2nd round. And most of the top 10 picks have been going quite a bit higher than the 6th round. And he went 4th. He has some of the best draft capital of any of those guys. And the draft capital is great. But his profile is nothing like any of those other players. And really the only reason he went 4 is because none of the other receivers in this class are any good either, frankly, probably. I mean, that's they're not, I'm not saying they're all bad, but there
were a couple of receivers who I think are clearly better, but they may not have been the right fits. Right. You've got Wan'Dale Robinson. You've got one of the things I keep thinking with like Cam Ward is that, well, I mean, Daniel Jones like really flourished when he escaped from the Giants. And you're like, oh, wait, Cam Ward is not going to be escaping the Giants situation because of, you know, where we are with the offensive coordinator there. But I just think this is so clearly a thing where the most likely scenarios are still that he does very well. You mentioned the draft cost, the ADP. I think that that's actually fine, especially in best ball where you're drafting a ton of teams. For me, it's mostly a thing where I do feel very strongly that the number suggests that he doesn't have a very high ceiling and that he doesn't have a very high floor. These outcomes in the middle that are most likely are probably going to do well for him, especially when he's drafted this high, and especially when the team is not set up in such a way that it really can be anything other than Carnell Tate gets a lot of targets. That part creates a little bit more of a floor thing for you. But you think about Harrison. I mean, it was set up so he should have gotten a lot of targets as well.
So there's still a floor. There's still, and even Golden went with all the injuries there. And he had some, I think he got a little bit of a bad rap. He had some chances early last year and Love missed him. He was late on a throw in that Washington game and then later overthrew him. And Golden should have had 2 long TDs in that game. And I was out on Gold, but I was writing and stealing signals. Look, he's gotten open deep, but this gets back to that deep efficiency, volatility. Even Jordan Love, who's a good deep ball thrower, missed him the couple times that he got open, and then they kind of went away from him later. But yeah, it's going to be set up for Tate to get a lot of volume. I completely agree with that. And yet I love your point. It's a point that I made after I was on that stream last night. I was talking in some chats, but I made the we always say the small miss, big hit stuff. To me, this is a clear rookie profile where I don't see the big hit. And I do see the big miss. That's the thing about the rookies in these ranges, especially if you're playing best ball. Like, to a certain degree, like there's been some data shown with the best ball stuff that you want to avoid zeros and you want to have a lot of routes, and you're going to get a lot of routes from Tate. He probably does have a pretty strong floor. I think people are missing that there is a lower floor here, as you just said, like a lower floor than people realize. Some outcomes that could be pretty poor, especially for year 1. Like, he may still be good in year 2 and year 3, but the rookie stuff, sometimes they don't run enough routes in year 1. They're just not productive enough in year 1. And then where's the ceiling with this profile? That he should have done so much more if he's that dominant. He should have done more at different depths. He should have done more with the ball in his hand. He should have done more in earlier years. Where's the ceiling? And like, we're just making caveats for a bunch of stuff he did not do and saying, well, he would have done it if he wasn't playing with better players. Why isn't he not producing? And all the other guys that did play with good players in college, they did stuff alongside those guys more than Tate did. I have a real issue with his profile.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. One of the things I think, especially in weak wide receiver drafts, that we do see is, unlike running back, I mean, anybody can miss, and certainly everybody can get hurt, but early drafted wide receivers do miss, and the ones who miss tend to be the ones who don't have great profiles. And so you want to keep that in mind. Again, I don't see how this particular draft sets up for people who, have the 102, the 103, 104. I mean, it's going to be tough to get away from Tate there just based on where everyone else is as well.
Yeah. Fair. But is this a bet you'd want to be making with that type of capital in rookie drafts? I think
if you can, you should move down. And I do think there are enough people who are excited about Tate. And to recap, I mean, a good age-adjusted yards per route final season. And if you feel like that's almost certainly the main thing, then you would have a high grade on him. Some people in your league will have a very high grade on him. And even though the entire first round was pretty disappointing, if you move back to 106, 107, 108, you can probably make a similar pick. And there may be people who are just incredibly desperate to get Tate as opposed to one of these other guys in the first round. I mean, this has the first round potential just to be a total wipeout, which, if you need to improve your dynasty team, that's a pretty bleak kind of outlook.
Yeah, it is a pretty huge bummer that it does look poor. And we should talk about some other guys the rest of the way and why there are some concerns. You mentioned there's a couple receivers you like more than Tate. I don't have very strong opinions that often I get this worked up when I feel like no one is making this case and it runs counter to like the conventional wisdom. And so that's sort of where I'm at with Tate. I guess my position is not that I'm out on Tate. I think you put it well. He's going to run a ton of routes. There's going to be a floor here. I think Ward's better than probably his rookie year numbers were, which, by the way, were just horrendous. But if Ward is at least a competent quarterback, the way that he's a little bit of a gunslinger is going to help the receivers that he plays with throughout his career. I'm hoping for that long term, just for the NFL and for fantasy generally. We need more good quarterbacks. But I also think that would be really positive for Tate. And Tate's probably, I want to say almost certainly better than A.O. Manor and Chimere Dike and those guys that were running, these day 3 receivers that were running routes last year. I don't think Tate is bad. What my position is when I say all these concerns is more that I feel like everything I'm seeing and all the stuff that I'm reading and a lot of the different draft guides and things around the industry and people that I'm talking to, they're making the case for Tate that is a favorable one, and then throws those caveats. Yeah, he was playing with Jeremiah Smith and all these things, and they played a really slow offense, and we have to control for all these things to look at his per route numbers and all of that. And I think a lot of that is fair, but I genuinely think that the entire like fantasy perspective is too far to that side, whatever direction you want to call it. And I'm like more in a reasonable spot, but because I'm further back from everyone, it seems like I'm out on the player entirely. And I just want to be clear, I'm not like out on the player entirely. I do think it's a really strong counterpoint when you dig into everything I was trying to say there and the point I was trying to make there. But I don't want it to be that I hate Carnell Tate or I think he can't succeed or he's not going to be good longer term. I think he's a tricky 2026 pick at cost right now at some of the costs I'm seeing. And I think he's going to go higher now in best ball. The guy went 4th overall. Later in the top 10, one of those other receivers that you said are probably better than him. We get Jordan Tyson at number 8 to the Saints, which is also a tricky one. We're not the biggest Tyler Shuck fans here. He did some things well. He absolutely did some things well. We joke about him a decent amount. Excuse me. We joke about him a decent amount. Chris Olave is there. Juwan Johnson is there. They have nothing else. There's totally room here for Tyson to play alongside those guys. Part of the reason I've been talking about Juwan Johnson a decent amount is he ran a lot of routes, and you want tight ends in this day and age that run a lot of routes. Kellen Moore had him out there a lot, and there's nothing else. I mean, they traded for Devon Vele midseason, and they used him down the stretch. They still got like Bub Means and Kevin Austin and Mason Tipton, and they brought in Jalen Polk, who the Patriots have moved on from already. They brought in Trey Palmer, who I liked once upon a time. He's a fun dude for the Bucs. He'd probably be my favorite of all these names that I'm mentioning downstream of Vele. But you have Juwan Johnson. They bring in Noah Fant as well. You have some tight end depth now. But man, Tyson can step right in and run a lot of routes alongside Olave, right?
Yeah, and Tyson is fun. You have the injury issues, which we can kind of wrap with, but we're talking about someone who been a 46% career dominator rating. 2.6 yards per team attempt, 22 touchdowns, including 18 in his last 21 games, a breakout age of just over 18 years old. Now, similar to what we talked about with Tate's final year, Tyson's freshman year is sort of limited in terms of games and routes and that type of thing. But he was at 3 yards per route that season by SIS, which was better than where he was, in his 21-year-old 2025 season. 6'2", 203 pounds. One of the things that is kind of interesting here is that he draws targets so easily that he tends to get labeled as sort of a bigger JSN or maybe a less explosion, kind of bad hands version of Odell Beckham. And I guess within the context of this class, I feel like I almost have to just be, completely on board with Tyler Shuck. Love, obviously, Kellen Moore. Think playing in the Dome is fantastic. I mean, we're almost now to the point where I think you have the tier 1 with Love, and then you have tier 2 with Tyson, and then just a tier break. Just 2 one-player tiers, because there is so much separation to what the next situation / profile is. One of the things that's interesting here too, and the injuries are always tough to evaluate. I don't think people are too concerned about any of the individual injuries with Tyson. It's more this thing of the bad luck of continuing to suffer injuries, right? But the Arizona State people are like, yeah, he suffered that serious hamstring injury, but you know what he did when he suffered it in that game against Texas A&M? He stayed in the game and he won that game on the final drive after he had suffered the injury. So they're like, people who are worried about toughness don't understand what the situation is here. Again, when someone has had this many injuries already, you too tend to get a little bit nervous, but none of the individual injuries are a problem. We don't have quite the after-catch dynamism that I would like to see to say clear-cut superstar, but I mean, this was the slam dunk pick of the first round.
Yeah, I'm with you. This looks like a really fun fit. I think Shuck, I mean, it's funny. I've given Saints fans a hard time on Shuck. One of the things that is key about that is that he is older, and then they're like, it doesn't even matter. His age doesn't matter. And we were comparing him to Jackson Dart. I was on Twitter, and apparently the fan bases have been making that comparison since the draft last year. The point about age is just what's the ceiling from here to develop, right? It doesn't mean that he can't that he can't be good or isn't already good or whatever. It just means that you need to grade his production as a rookie on a curve. Like what Jackson Dart did is at such a young age that there's a lot of room to then grow, as we've seen throughout the history of the NFL. Young quarterback. Peyton Manning led the NFL in interceptions as a rookie, but he was a young rookie, and then he developed into one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Tyler Shuck probably not going to do that when he's already 26 years old, but that doesn't mean he can't be a competent quarterback for fantasy and for some of the other stuff. I was defending him going into last year as a guy who would actually be decent for Chris Olave, who I was pretty into, because he's a big, strong-armed, and fairly accurate passer that has some mobility and has some of the traits, was going to at least, I think, raise the floor a little bit from a Spencer Rattler. And when he got in there, he sort of did. And so there were some favorable elements from that perspective. I don't think Shuck's going to be bad. I don't think he can't make a Pro Bowl someday. Hell, Shedeur Sanders made one. But he's not going to be an MVP candidate in my mind long-term. But Tyson going there and playing in a passing game that's really going to basically be three dudes. The running backs will be involved, and maybe, Noah Fant, the second tight end, will be involved. But it doesn't seem like, this feels like I'm going to project this very concentrated when I get to projections. I'm going to give Olave plenty of work at the top. I'm going to give Juwan Johnson plenty of work as well, because he ran a lot of routes last year. He's third in the NFL in tight end receiving yards. I do think he's still going to be a big part of their pass game. But there's going to be more room for Tyson, because I don't think I'm going to project anyone else to do much of anything. Tyson's going to be very involved, run a lot of routes, and I think have plenty of room to be good early. And again, with a dome situation and with tempo in Kellen Moore's offense, and with a quarterback who can certainly support some players around him. So that's a fun landing spot. You talked about Ty Simpson a little bit. That seems developmental. It seems like he's probably not going to play much in 2026. I thought Jacob Sanderson made a good point on the Ship Chasing show last night that if you're in Dynasty rookie drafts, this landing spot does help you. It does. Because you're probably not taking Ty Simpson, but he's going to end up going a little bit higher now because you have a top 15 pick. You may be interested in taking him. I'm not sure. Some of our listeners, I personally think we're looking at the Jordan Love situation behind Aaron Rodgers, that they're going to give Stafford as long as the leash as he wants. He's been talking retirement the last couple of years, but he just won the MVP. He's not hanging him up this offseason. Maybe they're worried about that back being an issue going forward, and they really want to address the backup quarterback position so their team doesn't fall apart if Stafford falls apart himself. And yet it's tricky if Ty Simpson is not worth the 13th pick, if he's not actually that prospect that you should feel really great about. It does feel to me more developmental. He's a long way off from being what Stafford is, and they're not going to he's not going to push Stafford out. Even if you make the Rodgers Love comparison, it's really hard to see a scenario where Simpson is pushing Stafford out or into retirement. Do you have any major thoughts on Simpson other than what you noted about his profile being even more checkered than Penix?
I think the idea that he helps you is true in two directions, in that he's going to push some guys to you, which is helpful. And because even before this pick, in part because of the weakness of the draft, I was seeing him go in that sort of 12, 13, 14 range, which is reasonable in Superflex if you do anticipate him starting and scoring some, right? It's also something where if your team is good, I have a team with Monty where, we finished first 2 years ago, finished second last year, and only have one QB. And so you're going to have a really low pick. And that might be a situation where actually taking the risk makes some sense. But I do also think that you can take the risk in part because you can probably retrade Simpson, specifically because he is tied now to Sean McVay, in a way in which if he were tied to one of these poorly run teams, probably still not going to play in 2026. And then when you're thinking about 2027, you're like, everything could be different. They may have a new front office and they're looking in a totally different direction. The fact that Simpson is now with the Rams locks in his value as a trade asset. And that part of it is also, pretty compelling when you're talking about dynasty rookie drafts.
The next big play, or the next pick was Kenyon Sadiq to the Jets at 16. There was some talk they were going to go receiver. Mai Lemon is available there. We had Jets fan Ron Stewart on the live stream. He was hoping for Lemon. There was some consternation about the Sadiq pick in regard to in relation to that. You wanted Sadiq at 9 to the Chiefs when we talked last week. I mean, that was the fun thing that you were thinking the Chiefs might do. This guy ran a 4.39 in the 40, fastest time by a tight end ever. He had a 43.5-inch vertical. He jumped super far on the broad. Those are massive numbers, whatever. He also put up like 26 reps in the bench. So he's undersized, and everyone's like, oh, he's this undersized tweener, like athletic, like Evan Ingram type, except he also had a really strong bench number. This guy's just like an incredible athlete. You were describing him to me as like already going to be one of the best NFL athletes in the league the second he steps onto the field anywhere. He winds up with the Jets. It's a little interesting from the perspective that they took Mason Taylor in the second round last year, and Taylor is kind of thought to be more of a move tight end that isn't a great blocker necessarily. And that seems to be some of the concern with Sadiq, although I don't really get that when he's super young, Sadiq. He just turned 21 last month in March. So he played all of last season at 20. There's concerns about his production profile, but you do have to consider the age, which is what a lot of people are doing with Tate, for example. I just had a bunch of negativity on Tate, so I should emphasize that, I'm trying to view Sadiq similarly. There is a different curve for tight ends with the collegiate production. There's a lot of tight ends that have not necessarily had the full production in college because the college systems don't all feature the position and then have gone on to be better in the NFL than they were. It's a little different at receiver. You kind of need the production because all you do at receiver is run routes. Like we do have to think about this. At tight end, a lot of the times there's different responsibilities. There's blocking, there's movement. And that's part of why we see a slower developmental curve in the NFL as well, I think, is that you're not just a receiver. And so it's not just that the receiver metrics in college predict the receiver metrics in the NFL, or it's less so. And one of the big pieces of data that has been shown with tight ends over the last several years by a lot of people, I wish I could cite great examples. You might have some good ones. But that athleticism is huge. That having a certain degree of athleticism has correlated. The top tight end hits have all been really pretty athletic. Even the ones that we think of as not as athletic tended to test really pretty well. If you're going to have a fantasy stud, he needs to be probably a pretty big freak athlete, one of these size speed guys that is difficult matchup wise. And then the teams want to use them and they find it, interesting uses and all of those types of things. The issue with Sadiq and people's issue will he run enough routes? Did he have enough production in college? When a team takes a guy 16th overall, and look, it is the Jets. Yeah, you have your concerns, yada, yada, but they're going to be incentivized to find ways to use him. There is a sliding scale, even if his routes are capped a little bit. I don't know. I said it last night. It's not interesting to me to say like, yeah, he's not going to run enough routes. Like we know that routes are important. We know that volume's important in fantasy. There's still a sliding scale. People used to say that about Jimmy Graham. He's just a basketball player. He can't block. And then he became a superstar. And then they said, well, you can't take him as a tight end. You have to take him as a wide receiver because he really just plays wide receiver. It's like, all right, well, I mean, like that's what happens when you hit the ceiling of this archetype. Another name I'll throw out is Eric Ebron, who Frank Reich, a lot of people hating on Frank Reich over the last several years. He's the new Jets offensive coordinator. He was the coach for Indy when they brought in Ebron, and they used him as mostly just a passing downs only tight end. He wouldn't play a lot in obvious run situations. He would run a lot more routes in weeks where they trailed than they got into a lot of shotgun. And, I used to write about this in Stealing Signals. As his routes went up and down, what was signal and what was noise with Ebron, it was always correlated to game script and that type of usage. And that might be a little bit annoying and a little bit frustrating for Sadiq. But the point would be that Eric Ebron was also very fantasy relevant under Frank Reich in that type of a role. They found ways to utilize him as a receiver. And that doesn't have to be Sadiq's ceiling either. It's just one more data point of, okay, here's a routes limited player whose usage bounced around week to week. Tight end, the bar is lower at the NFL level as well. If this guy scores a lot of touchdowns, he's a freak athlete. We know the phenom, athleticism tends to correlate with touchdown production. If you get that type of production at tight end, like you get double-digit TDs at tight end, you're immediately a top 5 guy, like almost every year, right? And so I'm not saying Sadiq's going to do that. The Jets aren't going to score 10 touchdowns. Like it may be tough for them to score anything. But there's a lot of different paths, right? There, just because he's maybe a little bit more of a tweener doesn't mean he can't succeed at some point or in some way. And then once you understand all of that, you get back to the fact that this is a very unique athletic profile, right, Shawn? How excited are you about him? Are you concerned about him going to the Jets? What do you see with Sadiq?
Yeah, my biggest frustration is that, the Jets is not a good spot. You have a defensive-minded head coach. You have a quarterback who is basically just a pure first-read passer. You have the Frank Reich, mild concerns, as you just mentioned. And now you have actually a ton of competition for volume, not just across the 2 receivers who are pretty interesting now, but also Breece Hall. From the Jets' perspective, I love this, though, because they're going from having one of the worst and most demoralizing offenses ever to a team that just in one offseason is now loaded, right? The decision to keep Breece Hall as opposed to letting him get away. And then they make these 2 selections here. The Sadiq one it's very tricky for the reasons that you described. But the physical comps to Sadiq are Vernon Davis and Calvin Johnson. And I don't see how you can pass on that at pick 5 or 10, and certainly not at pick 16. Next Gen had Sadiq ranked as the number 3 prospect in the entire draft. There are some concerns, I think, about the blocking, but there are also potentially some silver linings there. People talk about how hard he works at the blocking. They talk about how this isn't a guy who can't do it at all, like some of the smaller players. You think about the number of tight ends that are being used in a lot of these formations and the creativity that some of the teams use. He's someone who certainly, if not asked to be the main blocking tight end, probably does bring a decent amount to you in a lot of individual tactical blocking situations. We even think about the way some of these guys who are young and extremely athletic develop, right? At one point, several years into Vernon Davis's career, when it was starting to become obvious that he wasn't going to be some massive compiler at the tight end position for fantasy. Now, he had multiple seasons where he scored double-digit plus touchdowns. But there was this discussion of Vernon Davis being so freakishly athletic. And even though the numbers offensively weren't great, someone who was a dedicated player, all of these types of things, that if he needed to be moved off of tight end, he could possibly play left tackle. That's how athletic Vernon Davis was. And when we think about how young Sadiq still is, right? Do the numbers match up to some of the recent tight ends from a production perspective? No. But when Tyler Warren was this age, Ben, he had 10 catches for 123 yards, right? The blow-up season that he had came 2 years after the age that Sadiq is now. It's going to be during Sadiq's second year in the NFL. And so when we think about the physical upside, when we think about the tactical upside for a team adding a freakish tight end, I think this is a fantastic pick by the Jets. I do think it's a pick that really can't help him in fantasy. I don't see a great path to scoring a ton of points in the first year, maybe the first 2 years. If you're willing to be patient, I think eventually we're going to be talking about Kenyon Sadiq as one of the great players in the NFL.
And you were alluding to it, but the Jets end up trading back into the first round for a third first-round pick at number 30. They take Omar Cooper. As we're kind of on the Jets, let's probably grab Cooper as well. You were kind of mentioning, yes, they also added him. They have Garrett Wilson. They brought in Adonai Mitchell midseason last year. Had some efficiency issues, but does seem to really get open a decent amount and could be a good additional receiving weapon there. Mason Taylor gives you some more tight end depth. You mentioned Breece Hall. They've got all these weapons now. How does Omar Cooper fit in there? A profile that down a tier from a top group that is also sort of down from most top groups feels to me like more of like a day 2 pick in most drafts. He goes 30 here. Is it an interesting late first round type of profile, or is he going to be like just a guy in what now is a pretty loaded skill position group?
Yeah, I think you're right to describe him as a day 2 pick and someone who probably has very little floor, but it is, I think, kind of exciting and probably is a good fit for them, right? He's not crazy athletic. You have the 4'4", 240, you got the 37-inch vertical. He's like 6 foot, 199 pounds. That gives you physical comps like Greg Jennings and Stephon Diggs. He's someone who played both outside and in the slot, sort of a slot machine. And I say slot player and yak machine for the national champions, which 502 of his 937 yards come after the catch, outside of Eric McAllister, who's kind of this, weird prospect, injured prospect from TCU. No one is anywhere close among prospects to the 26 evaded tackles from Cooper. In 2024, he drew a bunch of 15-plus targets, had 406 yards on targets that came 15 yards or deeper, including most of his touchdowns. This is kind of the profile that I like to see if someone is almost certainly a little bit of a reach. It's a profile where you've got a lot of flexibility. The person has demonstrated they can do a lot of things. They've demonstrated that even when they're competing in an offense that has a second player in Elijah Surratt, who also is kind of this controversial, is he underrated, is he overrated, but this other prospect has some good, efficiency numbers, and someone who was going to fight, right? People love the competitiveness from Omar Cooper, love the fact that he made the big catch to keep the undefeated season alive. And when we're talking about guys where maybe you aren't as worried about having incredibly gaudy numbers or having some crazy high yards per route run, when you're good at a lot of things and you're good with the ball in your hands, then I think you're potentially a better reality player than a fantasy player. But it's disappointing in that now I think this team is set up to cannibalize each other when you also assume just a kind of a low ceiling. I think the Jets did a fantastic job in this draft. And we're talking about a team that was maybe one of the most humiliating offenses in the last, 10, 15, 20 years last year. Suddenly has Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper, Kenyon Sadiq, Breece Hall. If you scheme this offense correctly so that whatever that first read is for Geno Smith, it's actually a decent read, I think this team is going to move the ball and score points.
Yeah. And to your point about complimenting the Jets, they only moved up 3 picks, but I also want to compliment the Niners. I really love this trade from both sides. So the Jets move up 3 picks from 33. They had the first pick of round 2. And they move up from 33 to 30. All they give up is 179, which is it's a 5th round pick, but it's the 38th pick of the 5th round. So it's well into the compensatories. It's after 32 teams pick, and then there's additional compensatory picks. It's only a couple picks before the start of the 6th round, but also when you factor in that there's compensatory picks at the end of the 3rd and the end of the 4th. When you say 179, like if every round was just 32 picks, this would be more than halfway through the 6th round. It's not that way. The compensatory picks exist. But it is, it's a very, very late fifth is what I'm trying to say. It's 180 picks into the draft. That's all the Niners got to move back 3 picks. But the reason I like it tactically from the Niners perspective is they're now the number 1 pick here on day 2. I don't know if there's going to be a trade. I've already seen a report. We're recording this on Friday morning. But there's a real advantage to being that team that's on the clock now for a whole day while teams, try to move around and things. They may move out of that pick. If not, that pick at the top of the 2nd round, there's also these commentaries about the ways that the rookie wage scale works, where the early seconds often have more surplus value or some of those things in some of the research that's been done. So I think they give themselves a lot of flexibility, a lot more time to think about what they actually want to do. And so that's probably why they took a little bit of a less than package. In the Jets' perspective, the Jets reportedly really liked Cooper at 16, but they go and take Sadiq there. He falls down to the back of the round, and they say, okay, we're going to jump back into the 1st round, get a guy that we did our due diligence on, we like, and we're only going to have to give up maybe a round 6 pick, essentially, a very late compensatory round 5 pick. Sure. Obviously the Jets should feel good about making that decision as well. So I'm with you. I like this a lot for the Jets to go make that aggressive move. not have to give up any future draft capital, not have to give up much other than a day 3 selection here this year. But I also get it from the Niners perspective in that they moved back just 3 slots and they get into a spot. We talk about this in rookie draft, Sean. Sometimes when you can't get what you actually deserve for the pick that you're on and you want to trade back, make a small trade back, just take something, anything to sort of reset that trade back. And then maybe you can make additional trade backs from there and start to compile your picks over multiple deals. Maybe that's what the Niners will do. Or maybe they just like picking at 33, having a little bit more time on the clock, make the right decision, all of those types of things. So anyway, I liked that from both teams. That was a fun trade at the end of the round. The Jets, as you said,
could be a little bit of a situation, like you mentioned, with the Commanders and the Chiefs, where one of the things with Cooper is that he was being described as a very 49ers type of pick. That may specifically be one of the reasons why the Jets felt like they had to make that move, because there are multiple other guys who, in a vacuum, I mean, you have Denzel Boston. I don't know that tight end exactly does what the 49ers need, but you have Eli Stowers. You have other guys who can replace the type of production that you expect from Cooper, but you don't have exactly him. You don't have exactly that stylistic profile.
Yeah. So the Jets add a couple skill position guys. Interesting day 1 from them for sure. The other picks we haven't gotten to are some of the more interesting players. There's 3 remaining. Really, Mai Lemon and KC Concepcion are the interesting ones. Jadarian Price is actually very interesting as well too. But let's start with Lemon. We talked about it a little bit at the top. The Eagles move up a couple of spots here with the Cowboys. I felt like the Cowboys really helped out the Eagles here, that Lemon is falling and that, you don't see these interdivisional trades necessarily, that the Eagles have had all these issues with A.J. Brown. All this stuff is going on. Certainly the idea that they could get Lemon to fall to 20 and then make a little move up and get Lemon onto their roster was something that when they're coming into the night, they're probably over the moon about that possibility. Because you've said that Lemon is probably the guy that you like the most in this wide receiver class. They give up the picks 114 and 137. They get a future 7th round pick, I believe, back from the Cowboys. So they did give up a decent amount to move up, a couple of picks in the middle rounds, certainly more than the Jets gave up to move up 3 picks, 10 picks later, because the Eagles moved from 23 to 20. The Jets later went from 33 to 30. And yet the Eagles do this to get a faller, a divisional trade. I mean, the Cowboys made him pay a price. I just thought it was an interesting divisional trade. But the Eagles, probably a smart move forward. But Lemon, a guy, there's been some talk that he's mostly just a slot receiver, this and that. Played, I think you already mentioned it. They probably think he can play on the outside. Play on the outside a little bit, and I saw some numbers that he was better on the outside from like a yards per out run perspective in these things in the limited sample that he was out there. So going forward, you have Lemon now, Devonta Smith, who you obviously very much like. They did bring back Dallas Goedert. Seems like their offense is going to go forward looking similar to what it's looked in the past, maybe some multi-tight end sets and those things, but that Lemon is going to step in now as the other of 2 key wide receivers that their scheme sort of likes. The question I've seen is sort of the match with Hurts, who doesn't love to throw over the middle. Lemon really thrived over the middle. Some of those types of things. Is this sort of slot receiver, intermediate, in-breaking route receiver a tough fit for Jalen Hurts, who may have some issues with those things? But yeah, what do you see about the fit? What do you like about Lemon? And what did you think about the Eagles trade up here?
Well, I hate the fit. And we even have reporting of like Hurts not being very coachable on the passing front. Because, yeah, I mean, one of the things that's so cool about Mai Lemon, you do have that success over the middle among the top prospects. Tetrell McMillan was easily number 1 in what SIS has designated as middle yardage a year ago. Lemon was easily number 1 this year. I mean, Lemon's production profile is just really fun, right? You have 12 games, 1160 yards from scrimmage. You have the 13 touchdowns, 3.0 yards per team attempt, 3.7 yards per route, according to SIS, which obviously doesn't record nearly as many routes, so you have a higher per route number. That 38% dominator, 22-year-old early declare, 32 kick returns, 6 punt returns. I mean, this is someone where the team wants to have the ball in his hands. But then the other kind of interesting thing here, beyond getting a guy who, is being compared to Amon-Ra St. Brown, is that I think quietly the teammate thing is maybe interesting. And maybe this is talked about a lot, right? But you have Deuce Robinson and Zachariah Branch transferring after the 2024 season, where Lemon has become kind of the main guy. And then, Robinson, massive numbers last season. Branch used in this weird underneath role where his ADOT is like 3, but still ends up with a lot of production. Jacoby Lane, who I think is a fun sleeper. I don't know that any of this matters, but he drew 211 pass interference yards last year. And if you put the pass interference yards into actual yards and go with the yards per route, he actually trumps Carnell Tate, right? And you have Lemon and Lane as the number 1 and number 2 prospects in this class from a yards per route perspective. Lemon has far and away the top next-gen production score in the class. There's no one remotely comparable to him, according to their analysis. I mean, how do you end up in an offense where we've been lamenting for years what it's doing to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and finally you're like, okay, well, Devontae Smith is going to be the guy, and at some point they're going to have to throw in the ball because you got to move the ball some. I don't know. Maybe this is the year we get good coaching from the Philadelphia Eagles offensive staff. And Lemon is the type of player where, that I love Devontae Smith. I think he's always been underrated. I think he's one of the better receivers in the NFL. I think this could help him, but I also think it's something where Lemon could unlock something within the Eagles offense where he's just the number 1 right away.
Very interesting. Just to put a little of point on what you were mentioning, Deuce Robinson, Zachariah Branch played with Lemon the first 2 years at USC and then transferred away, essentially because Lemon had sort of the bullish case would be had sort of supplanted them or made it difficult for them to reach their full potential. And you were saying they went to different places and were able to be productive at different places. Lemon won out there, and then last year with Jacoby Lane still there, Lane, another one who was creating the logjam at wide receiver for USC. Lemon clearly the top guy. So from a teammate perspective, dominated a lot of other good players who are interesting names. So he's interesting. The fit. Maybe he'll unlock something. I'm skeptical of that as well because I think A.J. Brown's really, really good at football, and he couldn't unlock it. And I think anything Mai Lemon can do, A.J. Brown can probably do, is sort of my perspective, especially over the middle on those kinds of things. I think A.J. Brown can do a lot of that stuff. The fact that you couldn't get that to work with A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, is tricky for, Mai Lemon's going to have to be really, really good to unlock something that Brown was unable to unlock. So that's, a concern. Concepcion goes to the Browns at 24. Interesting, right? That we get another kind of analytics darling. There's some people that really liked Concepcion. They obviously took Harold Fannin last year. My concern for him, we talked about this last week, if the Browns were a good fit. I kind of made the case on Bananas last week that you have Fannin, who's probably this legit target earning young tight end now. They, Njoku's, moving on, and they're ready to make Fannin this dude who, by the way, another kind of tweener tight end. Oh, he's not going to block enough to play enough. And then all of a sudden he just has a great rookie year, and they get rid of David Njoku, who's a 3-down tight end. And they're like, well, no, we just want to move forward with Harold Fannin because that's what teams can do. It's not the only thing at the tight end position. There's just a huge emphasis right now on tight ends who don't stay on the field enough because they don't block enough. And it's just not the only thing. There are different, there's still a range of outcomes of how these things can work out. So anyway, Harold Fannin, number 1 there. Jerry Jeudy, terrible season last year. We joked about it a bunch. Still got a lot of routes and volume. And as far as a rookie stepping in and seeing a bunch of work right away, Jerry Jeudy is still there. And it's still a a part of the equation that has to be respected. He's not good for other players that he's there. They have Cedric Tillman. They have some other dudes, Isaiah Bond, whatever. I don't think there's a lot else there that's concerning. But my problem is the size of the pie, like we were talking about with some of these other teams. If you have Fannin and you have Judy and then you have, Concepcion's fighting with that, I think he's going to be probably a top 3 guy. He got first-round draft capital. And by the way, Judy is not going anywhere. Ton of dead money. I was just pulling up his contract to get the numbers. But even if they tried to do something post June 1st, they would have a bunch of dead money on the books going forward. It's one of those things where even next offseason, he's probably stuck there through 2027, and then things kind of free up beyond 2027. So we're kind of a couple of years away from them doing anything with Judy. My concern about the size of the pie is you got this outdoor stadium, you got the windy games late in the year I was talking about last week, but more importantly, you have the quarterback position. It seems like Shedeur Sanders is going to play a decent amount. I don't think he was as good as some of his biggest supporters want us to think. I don't think he's going to be great for supporting the wide receiver position, and I don't think Deshaun Watson is the answer, but it seems like that's what they're doing this year is Sanders, Watson, maybe Dylan Gabriel still in the equation. There's not really anything else that they've done at the quarterback position. And so to me, Cleveland's going to have a bad passing offense is the way that I'm looking at it. And, I hope that Fannin can be good enough. I don't really want to be that into the Jerry Jeudy rebound. And then Concepcion's going to factor in here, but is the pie big enough for him to step on Fannin and Jeudy and with the quarterback position being what it is and be a productive rookie, or is this another frustrating landing spot for fantasy?
Yeah, I think the thing that rescues a lot of it is that Concepcion is the best ball in hand guy in the draft. And so you think a little bit about what Todd Monken did early in his tenure with the Ravens, those first couple of games where everything is at the line of scrimmage. I would expect Concepcion and Fannin to be peppered with short targets that they can then try and do something with. We're talking about a guy who rushed for 320 yards as a freshman. He was a big-time kick returner for Texas A&M as a junior, 25 punt returns, 2 of which he brought back for touchdowns. He's got great numbers after contact, great numbers with evaded tackles. The concern with him has been the drops, and those drops sort of mitigated a little bit of the breakout from an air yards perspective last year, where he actually went over 1,200 air yards. This is a guy who, in the wide receiver prospect lab, actually scores fairly close to Jordan Tyson, well ahead of Lemon, well ahead of Carnell Tate, even with that draft spot that's obviously worse than specifically Tate's factored in. And this is kind of one of those where I think it gives you an interesting floor because you don't have a number one to wipe him out unless you want to think of Fannin that favorably, despite the tight end element of it. And you probably have a bad team that will probably need to throw more than what would otherwise be tactically savvy with the running backs that they have. I don't think that you have necessarily this ceiling of dominating down the field and blowing up for, a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase type of rookie year, but probably most fantasy managers are not thinking about it in those terms anyway. If you give them Concepcion with a decent floor and the potential to really generate a lot of targets, they probably would take that at the prices that they're going to pay. And, within the context of this class, Concepcion is one of my favorites. I don't love having him with Sanders. And one of the things is you're like, 2027, it'll be somebody else. When the Rams just drafted a developmental, not great prospect, 13th overall, because quarterbacks are so hard to get. You can get stuck like guys like Garrett Wilson have gotten stuck with bad quarterback play more or less forever. Just because there are paths to getting someone else after this year doesn't mean that you're ever going to fill the spot successfully when someone starts their career in such a bad situation for pure upside.
It's a sobering reminder, but it's so true. It's so important. It sucks, but it's a reality of the draft and where these things happen and I think it's so true right now as we move forward into the NFL. We've talked about the haves and have-nots for a half decade, it feels like, but as the defenses have gotten better and better, I mean, it's the good situations and the bad situations. I mean, a lot has to change to get into a good situation suddenly, right? I mean, it's not even necessarily just who the quarterback is, but it's the system and it's all the players around you and all of the. I mean, look what Sam Darnold was able to do in Seattle and some of those things, because a lot of the other stuff and the elements around him was positive, and that worked out favorably for JSN and a lot of that stuff. There's different, I think, degrees of it right now at the NFL level. We've talked about this. I'm not going to go into a heavy, layered, nuanced conversation and use a million different examples, but yeah, you could see that be a problem for Concepcion through his entire rookie contract, which would be a real issue. You could see it for other guys in the first round. You see it for Carnell Tate, and Tate could be a lot better than I was describing, and yet it could be a problem for him. And there's several other situations that could be like that. Miami is one. Miami didn't end up taking any of these receivers, which was sort of fortunate for fantasy, but I mean, that could be a situation that whoever lands there is in a tough spot for several years. Certainly, you look at guys like Garrett Wilson you talked about, or what A.J. Brown has been saying is like, man, I've never really been in a good situation my entire career. I'd like to have that before I'm like way over the hill, is what he's sort of trying to force his way out of Philly. Seems like he's going to wind up in New England with Drake May. I'm going to be back in on that guy. We talked about, we did our favorite picks of the different rounds a few months ago, I think, for Stealing Bananas. I said that he was my favorite pick. I think he's moved up. I think I said Devonta Smith was my favorite pick the round after, and he's moved up as well, I was noticing. So that was kind of fun to see those work in our favor. That's all the wide receivers.
You think that the Eagles drafting a wide receiver and the Patriots not drafting a receiver with Cooper and Boston available is, I mean, you're going to take that as more evidence that A.J. Brown is going to the Patriots?
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah, and also like Adam Schefter just outright saying like it's already agreed to has been a helpful piece of information as well. That's all the receivers that went in the first round. We talked about Sadiq. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the guys we could see on day two and what we're hoping for. But I mean, we've been recording for a long time now, Sean. Day two starts in about 4.5 hours. So by the time this post is even up, some of those picks maybe already have happened. The last player that went in round one, the second running back of round one, Jadarian Price, closes the night at 32 to the Seahawks. We had just talked on the last episode about maybe the Seahawks, who were rumored to like Jonah Coleman, would take a running back a little later, somebody like a Coleman, and he would be very interesting landing in that spot. It was a great spot for a running back. Price is the guy who gets that nod. We had our concerns about Price's usage. He clearly, was overshadowed by Love. All the stuff we were talking about with Tate and about these teammates at wide receiver, it's a little more of a concern for me at receiver, where you're still running routes and you're not earning volume and things. At running back, it's a little different, where you can be really good and you just don't get the opportunity because you're behind a really good player. And yet there's been similar poor results for those types of players recently. Like Roschon Johnson, that was the take. He's behind Bijan, so he's good. Well, I mean, it has not worked out for Roschon. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, both of the running backs in round one, went to Notre Dame, played together. Love, obviously the superstar. Price is a guy who never has more than 120 carries in a collegiate season, never has more than like 10 receptions. I think he had 15 total receptions across the 3 years combined. The efficiency, though, was very good. And so you have the same question of like, well, okay, small sample efficiency, doesn't get as much opportunity that if you want to make a bull case on Carnell Tate, that's what you're making. I have more of an issue with it at wide receiver. At running back, I can get there a little bit more. The missed tackles forced per touch stuff, pretty strong each of the years, and overall pretty strong. The rate of breakaway rushes, pretty strong each of the years, and overall pretty strong. The yards after contact per attempt stuff, pretty strong each of the years, and then overall, obviously, pretty strong. That's why he basically was a 6 yards per carry guy each of his 3 years. We have nothing in the pass game. The Seahawks are swearing up and down that they've seen that from him. John Schneider, I saw the press conference, was talking about he's good friends with the agent, and they had talked, and the agent was talking about how Price has been, doing the wide receiver drills and stuff in college, and all these things that people say about a guy who, if he was a really, really talented receiver, probably would have caught more than 15 passes across 3 seasons. But it's possible that out from under Jeremiah Love, the usage is different. Running back is such a usage position. If he's just on the field a ton, probably he's going to catch some balls, right? I mean, they drafted him in the first round. Is there enough in the per touch efficiency and the breakaway run rate and some of those things? You have some concerns about the athletic profile as well that you shared with us. The size and speed combo, not amazing. He's not that huge and he's not that fast, frankly. But he still did have enough evaded numbers and breakaway runs and things that you probably think he's a good runner, like a good running back, potentially. We don't know about the workhorse element. We always say that being a workhorse is a skill. That's, you know, what you want to see. Jonathan Taylor and Ezekiel Elliott and all these guys, they got a ton of carries in college, and people said there's too much tread on their tires. And then they came to the NFL and they showed that, you know, being able to tote the rock is a thing, you know, and then they went toe to the rock at the NFL level. And Trey Benson, we were just talking about, the issue with him was he never did it in college. He never toted the rock enough. And then he goes to the pros and he can't hold up to an NFL workload. And now he's like basically bye-bye. Arizona went ahead and drafted a different running back, 3rd overall. We have to look past all of that to get excited about Price. But is there enough in the per touch efficiency and enough in what's good here to look past the size speed issues and to look past the lack of overall workload at the good situation in Seattle and the fact that, you know, Charbonnet is coming back from an ACL. They brought in Emmanuel Wilson, but there's not a ton else there. I think I'm going to wind up getting a little bit excited about Jadarian Price, I think, Shawn.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun because it rounds out this first round, right? Where now you have Ty Simpson probably going at the back end, or maybe for someone who needs a quarterback 8 or 9. I had Price ranked 11th in part because after the first 10 guys, there is no one, and you're thinking this could happen, and then it does happen. And this is the very, very, very best case scenario. Now, the other thing we talked about a little bit before is that the Seahawks are quietly not that great of a fantasy landing spot or a fantasy environment. They're a perfect landing spot. Not as good a fantasy environment maybe as people think in terms of how they actually create expected points for their guys. I think that could change a little bit in 2026 as well. When you're looking at Price himself, it's kind of funny because it comes down to a couple of comparisons that maybe don't get people that fired up or maybe even think that I'm being silly. But I would say that, I mean, Jadarian Price is like a poor man's Emmett Johnson, who is going to go on day 3. He's a very poor man's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. One of the things about the whole Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing, right, is that Edwards-Helaire, as a 20-year-old junior, gained almost 1,900 yards from scrimmage, caught 55 passes, averaged 6.6 yards per attempt. This is a guy who wasn't that athletic in terms of the long speed, but has almost a 40-inch vertical leap, right? Price's athletic comps are Shane Vereen, Duke Johnson. I mean, those guys were okay at the NFL level. And certainly your physical comps are not destiny. Your production comps are not your destiny. And the thing with mentioning Clyde Edwards-Helaire is simply also being aware of the fact that there's a range of outcomes here. Because as much as I hated the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick for the Chiefs, so much of that was because you had Jonathan Taylor still available. Because you had DeAndre Smith still available. Swift. You don't have those guys in this draft. And Edwards-Helaire, while not as good as the guys who went behind him, should have been a lot better than he was. So simply saying that Price is a poor man's version of him doesn't mean that Price couldn't hit a 75th percentile outcome where CEH hit a 10th percentile outcome, right? And yes, it makes me very happy that we now have another legitimate first-round pick. If you have the 112, you can either take Price or much more likely, you're going to have someone like Stowers or Simpson or Boston pushed down to you.
The 2026 draft, your slogan, the very poor man's Michael Penix and the very poor man's Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. That's what we got from this class. 2 guys that you've beaten up over the years as being, you know, pretty poor picks in their own right. But we got the very poor man's version of those here in 2026. What an electric first round this year. I loved that. The very poor man's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And then you like explained that, well, Clyde Edwards-Helaire could have been better. And also there's no Jonathan Taylor in this class. And so, I mean, it's not like it was the worst thing in the world. But Jadarian Price to Seattle. I liked your note that they weren't very fantasy exciting or fantasy friendly last year, but they may be a little bit more so next year. I think they're going to have to be. I mean, that team played from ahead so much last year. They lost a lot of pieces on their defense. Sam Darnold led the league in giveaways, even while playing from ahead a bunch. If they get behind more, they're going to have to rely on him a little more. I think it's really hard to thread some of the needles that Seattle threaded last year. I think they're still going to be very, very good, to be clear, but no Clint Kubiak, all of these types of things that may lead them to play a little faster and not be able to just do the like defense, ball control, whatever, like a little bit of a looser outcome. It could just be less efficient and just a worse offense overall. But
I also love the fact that in your initial like framing of this, you're like, Jadarian Price may not be as bad as his profile looks because these are the talking points from his agent.
Oh yeah, no. That's definitely I mean, man, there's not a lot. I think you had it in one of your write-ups, and then I think I saw it in one of JJ Zacharison's write-ups that was like, among guys that have been drafted really high that have actually been good, the only other player who has had like as little receiving as Jadarian Price, like it's Derrick Henry, and then there's like no one else that actually has been successful. And Derrick Henry is like the biggest outlier of anything ever. So
he's
it's
like
not
35 pounds bigger than Price.
Right. He's massive. He's fast. The workload stuff that we were talking about, like that guy carried the load at a young age in college. Even go back to like, remember the high school stuff that people would talk about with Derrick Henry. It's like he ran for like 10 million rushing yards and 7,000 touchdowns. It's like, yeah, I mean, this guy was always built to be an NFL running back that was going to run like Jim Brown or something. Jadarian Price does not quite have that type of background on the rushing side, and then also absolutely no receiving. It's scary. And when you talk about like the comps of like Shane Vereen, I loved Shane Vereen, but I drafted Shane Vereen because I was playing a lot of PPR at a time when not everyone was playing PPR. People didn't understand that guys like Shane Vereen catching a ton of passes were pretty fun for fantasy football and PPR leagues. But that's the point. Shane Vereen caught a lot of passes. That's why he was relevant for a while there in New England. You mentioned Duke Johnson. He did that as well. You had the dual threat element. You wanted this type of profile to also catch. You mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The big exciting thing about his profile as a prospect was he caught a ton of balls with Joe Burrow. He led the class in receiving metrics out of that LSU offense. Jadarian Price. The one thing about that. Now, the Seahawks don't throw to their running backs, but the one thing about that is just because a running back didn't catch the ball a lot, especially when he was a change of pace secondary back and was behind a superstar like Jeremiah Love, it does not mean that they can't catch the ball. It's not particularly hard to catch the ball as a running back in a lot of situations. You're just leaking out. I think there's skill to it, and I think there's guys that are better at it than others, and you want to be able to have this stuff where you add to the base receiving skills of a running back. Like Christian McCaffrey is so additive, right? He's running routes and he's doing all of these additional things, and there's a feel and there's an ability to find space and that stuff. But there's guys that can't do any of it, but there are guys that can do the very basic stuff and catch a lot of balls, even though they didn't in college. Kenneth Walker was another one the Seahawks drafted, despite the fact that he didn't catch a lot of balls in college, because of these talks about. I remember looking at like grainy Kenneth Walker high school footage because that was making the rounds. Like, this guy can actually catch the ball. They felt that he had those skills, even though he didn't do it at Michigan State because they were just handing him the ball all the time. Jadarian Price may be able to catch, 40 balls at the NFL level, even though he only caught 15 his entire college career. It has happened. It's not impossible. It's just a very unique and a very extreme profile. And when you set certain cutoffs, there are things like the only guy that succeeded with this profile is Derrick Henry. I mean, there are things that make it very challenging. And yet, some of the agent conversations are interesting. You mentioned it in your write-up that his evasion was even higher than Love's, his evasion rate. Some of that per play stuff. You also mentioned the per play efficiency is sort of like it has to be there because there's nothing else to this profile. Like it better be there because you don't have the volume, you don't have the huge athleticism. You're playing behind Love. It's very important that you have that, but he does have it. Maybe.
I do think it's also an apples and oranges in a good way for Price type of thing. You mentioned that we don't have evidence that he can be the guy. And that's true. And that's very important. It is also the case when we think about someone like Trey Benson or Marshawn Lloyd. Those guys were not trusted by their coaching staffs in college, even though they were competing with non-prospects. Whereas Price manages to carve out a decent amount of work against a generational type of prospect. And so that portion of it, which people have been spinning in favor of Price, I think is very, very true. That this is a completely different thing from guys who couldn't earn work against people who weren't good college players even. I mean, that's one of the things with Benson and Lloyd, where you look at their athleticism and you're like, the athleticism and the efficiency is there. The fact that those were red flags. Now, it doesn't mean that Lloyd and Benson had to miss the way that they have, but certainly that portion of the red flag for them still looks like it was a key part of their profile. Whereas Price, it's encouraging to me that he did get as many touches as he did when you think about where Jeremiah Love is.
Something else Schneider said in his press conference was he made a comment about 5,000 yards and 55 TDs, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And I just talked about the Derrick Henry high school numbers, so I just went and pulled up Jadarian Price's high school numbers. That was his rushing through his 4 years in high school. So he did tote the rock a lot in high school, and so like as a true freshman, he was a 1,400 yard runner. It was actually the year he carried the ball the most. 1,400 yard runner with 16 TDs. He got hurt. It looks like maybe a sophomore year, only played 7 games. Junior and senior year, 1,100 yards and then 1,800 yards, 18 touchdowns both years. Finishes with almost 5,000 rushing yards because of the 3,000 yard seasons, and won the final year's an 1,800 yard season. And the 55 touchdowns includes 3 years of 16 plus rushing TDs. But the other note I wanted to say about this as I pull up his collegiate numbers, first couple years, he catches 5 and 4 balls. The last 2 years, 28, 27 catches his junior and senior year in high school, 219, 327 receiving yards those 2 years, a couple of touchdowns. So he had 587 receiving yards as a high school player in Texas, was a 4-star recruit. You wind up at Notre Dame and you wind up playing alongside Jeremiah Love and everything. I assume people already kind of knew that he was a big recruit coming out and all of these things, but some of that was news to me. And it's interesting that he did catch 25 plus balls, both of his final 2 years in high school, where a lot of the times in high school, when you have a really great running back who's running for 1,800 yards, they just hand you the ball every single time, right? But they were also throwing to him out of the backfield. He was doing a little bit more of the workhorse stuff, a little bit more of the 3 down stuff as well. So pretty exciting high school numbers if you want to try to fill in some blanks, because there's a lot of blanks to be filled in on Price. Any other big thoughts on round 1? Any, I guess, big thoughts on round 2, even though, people are probably listening to this after round 2 and we don't have any information?
It's just another first round of the NFL draft. You always get these crazy things. You always have a lot of moves that don't make sense strategically. And then every once in a while, those work out. Mostly they don't, right? Mostly the ones that we criticize because you now need a narrow outcome, an unlikely outcome to happen. And that's not the way to build these great teams. But I'm excited with the way it ended. I love having Price in there. That's great for fantasy. I think that we do have enough decent receivers to fill out a first round. I'll be excited to see where Boston goes. Certainly it'll be interesting to see where Stowers goes. Stowers may not be the second tight end picked. There are so many really athletic wide receivers, and most of them have some interesting point in their production profiles. Now, most of these guys still end up with terrible prospect lab scores because you need more than one like vaguely compelling season, especially if that season occurred at 23 years of age, which, we're entering sort of a new era in terms of how we evaluate these prospects with so much money involved in the college level. And Ben, it's been absolutely fascinating to follow the college basketball, as you mentioned to listeners a few times. I'm a bigger college basketball fan than college football fans, and you have players now staying in college because they're going to be paid like twice as much as they would make based on where they would go in the NBA draft. The NFL situation and the college football situation is different, but certainly you have players now who are extremely athletic, who do things at lower levels, who go up to the higher level. One of the things is that some of the guys like a Jeff Caldwell, for example, like an Eric Rivers, you're kind of thinking, well, if they had one more year in college, that year to transition successfully to the high level and then put up a performance, next year they would actually have lit the world on fire. The problem is that next year would occur at like 23, 24, 25 years of age. And you're like, does that, I mean, obviously that doesn't matter in the same way. I mean, this is like mid NFL career for someone who's actually a good player, a good prospect. But I do think we're going to, a week from now, be kind of excited about some of the landing spots for this receiver class that does just have so many freak athletes.
Sounds good. A little optimism to close out the show. I'm excited to see the rest of the weekend. But yeah, that is it for round one. A lot more to come, or people have already seen everything else that's come. And it's kind of, it's weird to record a podcast, like, in the middle of round one and round 2 and 3. But, we know what we know now, and we'll know more later, and we'll be back next week to break down more.
That'll do it for our round one reaction. Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me is Ben Gretch. BenGretch.substack.com. Love to have you guys over RotoViz. Volume 3 of the rookie guide will be coming out. Have fun. Hope your favorite players land on your favorite teams. We'll be watching rounds 2 and 3 on the edge of our seat. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.